Howdy and welcome to part 1 of forging a rifleman's knife. So while I've got the forge warming up, I figured I'd take a little bit of time to show you guys my starting material that I'm going to be working with here, and then also kind of explain what a rifleman's knife is. So right off the bat, this is what we're going to be starting out with. Now I've cut out two pieces here. This is going to be 5160 steel. It's a 1/4 inch thick, 1 inch wide, and right now it's 9 inches. So the overall length I'm shooting for the blade itself is 10 inches. So we know we need to draw this out to 10 inches. And then this section back here will be the tang. Now I've already made one of these. As you can see, this is just a test piece. It's not going to look anything like this aesthetically when it's done, but this is the test piece there. Now I want to make one knife with a wooden handle, and I want to make another one with an antler handle. That's why I'm going to be forging out two from this. Okay, so we have one here and one there. Each will be a separate knife. Now, what is a rifleman's knife? So when we look in history, okay, specifically the 18th century or 1700s, the style of knife I'm shooting for is a mid to late 1700s big knife, okay, or rifleman's knife. When we talk about knives, okay, this would typically be called a belt knife, a rifleman's knife, or even a long hunter's knife. Now, when we say long hunter, we're not referring to a hunting knife that's long. Okay, what we're actually referring to is someone's title. Okay, so back then, there were things called long hunters, and these guys would go out on these hunts for an extended amount of time. You know, I'm not talking hours or days, I'm talking months, maybe even years. Okay, and that's how they would make their living, and they were called long hunters. All right, so I want to create a knife that would be like a belt knife or a long hunter's knife. So that's what we're going to be shooting for. Now, as far as the purpose of the knife goes, it could be used for, camp tasks or chores, fighting. Okay, obviously today we don't really have to worry about that, but back then that was a big concern. It would not be used for skinning or really even like a hunting knife. It's more of a longer kind of fighting style knife or self-defense knife or really even, something like a chopping knife. But anyways, going to be forging out two of these today. The forge should be getting up to temperature right about now. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, this is the first heat in the forge. And here we're just going to go ahead and start drawing out the tip of the knife. Usually I like to start off by forging out the tang. That just gives me a really good representation of where the tang is going to be compared to the start of the blade. But I kind of want to change things up, so we're going to start by forging out the tip here. Alright, here we are on heat number 2, and I'm just going to continue to forge in this tip here. You can see I'm kind of angling the steel and hitting down at an angle to kind of help mush that steel together down towards the anvil. And like I said, this is just going to help form that tip of the knife. And here we are with heat number 3. So same thing as before, we're just going to do the same process to kind of stretch out this steel and kind of help elongate everything as well as form in that tip. So slowly but surely we're getting there. Not too concerned about, missing hammer blows or putting too deep of hammer marks in the steel at this point, as there's a lot of material that is going to have to be moved here in just a few minutes. So just going to do some adjustments here, kind of fine tune the tip to my liking for this step. And then we can move on to the next step. And the next step is to go ahead and start stretching out this material. So this is a pretty violent process on the steel itself. And as you can see, I'm actually compressing the steel between the horn of the anvil and the hammer itself. And this is causing the steel to stretch out and lengthen in size. So once I'm happy with the dimension or get it close enough to the blade length that we're looking for, then I'll actually switch to my original hammer, which is more of a flat face, and I'll come through and kind of smooth out all those hammer marks, because as you can see, it's putting some pretty deep hammer marks in there. Now we can begin actually smoothing out the steel, and in doing so, this is also helping it stretch out just a little bit more than what it's already being stretched. So my main goal here is to just come in and smooth out all those little divots that we created on that horn of the anvil, and just kind of get everything as flat and as smooth as we can. And we'll just continue to smooth everything out for one more heat. And again, the main goal here is to just smooth everything out and get it as even as possible. But at the same time, we are stretching the material out just a little bit longer. So I want to make sure that I keep everything flat. The blade warps a little bit when you hit it on one side, so I'm just coming back in and kind of straightening that out as I'm smoothing out the material. Try to even everything up, keep everything as straight as possible before I put it back in the forge. So this is looking pretty good. There's still some hammer marks in there, there's going to be. So we'll get this thing back in the forge and we'll move on to the next stage. And now comes the fun part of the forging, which is essentially just a bunch of guesswork. So everything up until this point has essentially been forged upside down. And what I mean by that is the part of the blade that looked like it was going to become the edge was actually the spine of the knife. So right now I'm actually putting a massive bend going downward into the blade, and this is called a preform. So I'm actually guessing how much the material will move when I go ahead and forge in my bevels. Because when I forge in my bevels, what's going to happen is because I'm smashing that metal between itself and actually forcing it to go downward to create an edge, that's going to force the rest of the metal to actually bend upward and create kind of an upward swooping design or motion similar to like a cavalry saber or a horseman's saber, where it's, you know, it has that massive upward bend in the shape of the blade. And we don't want that because that's not the style we're going for at all. So I have to kind of guess how much that's going to move and forge in the opposite direction here. And then when it comes time for me to forge in the bevels, it's really just a guessing game, and I hope that I get it right. Alright, now that we got our preform ready to go, we can go ahead and start putting in the bevels. So here I'm coming back to the heel of the blade, and I'm just going to start kind of pinching that metal downward. And I can accomplish this by just setting the blade up on an angle and then coming in and kind of hitting on an angle and dragging the hammer off of the material. And that's going to push that metal downward to create what will become the edge. So I like to go ahead and do this on the heel, get that established, and then I can slowly work my way down the entire length of the blade. I know some guys like to start on the tip and work their way back. I mean, the thing with bladesmithing is there's really no wrong way to do it. You know, whatever works for you is the best way, honestly. But I like to start at the heel and slowly work my way forward, just that way it can establish where my tang is going to start. In this case, since I haven't forged in my tang yet, I want to make sure that I get a good establishment of where that edge ends and where that tang is going to start. Now that we got that terrifying step out of the way, we can begin working on something a little more simpler. So this is the step where I'm going to go ahead and start forging in my tang. Now, as you can see, there's two, I'd call them triangular notches cut into the steel. So off camera, I just took an angle grinder and created these cuts, and that's just going to help me isolate the tang a little better. It was a little quicker and easier than forging them in, so that's why I do that. Now you can also see that the blade has a weird kind of waviness to it. That's no problem, we can fix that later on. But here I'm just going to start hitting that tang material, then I'll rotate it 90 degrees, hit it again, and just repeat that process to slowly start drawing out the tang. Alright, here's what both knives are looking like after the initial forging, and you can tell that each knife is a little different, but compared to the original drawing, it's pretty darn close, and we've got plenty of room to work with here. The main thing was getting that steel stretched out to 10 inches, and forging in the bevels and the tangs. So that's going to be it for part 1. If you liked the video and you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments about anything you saw in the video, feel free to put them down below. If you'd like to stay up to date on current projects and upcoming videos, go ahead and check out my Instagram. It'll be linked in the description. And remember to keep your tools sharp and your mind sharper, and thanks for watching.